I'm telling you, go watch Ashton Genty. His ability to hit home runs and run powerfully is outstanding. College football has never been better. Interest has never been higher. Believe that we are at the dawn of the golden age of college football. It was an epic day of college football. It was one of those days where you fall in love with the sport all over again. What's up, everybody? This is the Joel Klatt Show. I am Joel Klatt, and this show is presented by Hampton by Hilton. Thanks to all the folks over at Hampton by Hilton. We got a great show for you today. Remember, rate, review us wherever you're listening to your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, first of all, thank you. And second of all, go ahead and subscribe to this show. Leave a comment down below, like the video, do all the things. And then you can follow us wherever you like the social media at Joel Klatt Show. We're all over the place, and you can find that content there. You can follow me at Joel Klatt. I'm really excited about this show because I think after the first month of the season, it's time to evaluate a little bit where we're at. And in particular, what is surprising us out of the first month of the college football season, both bad and good. So here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to break up the good surprises, the bad surprises, and I've got my top 5 of each, good surprises and bad surprises so far in this 2024 season in college football. I'm going to start with good because who wants to start out on a bad note? But we're going to alternate back and forth, 5, 5, 4, 4, so on and so forth. Let's get after it. My number 5 good surprise so far in college football is some of these teams that we didn't expect to be undefeated that are undefeated. We've got Indiana, Rutgers, Duke, and BYU all as undefeateds. And these are great stories, each and every one of them. Obviously, we've got some new coaches at these places. We've got some old coaches at these places. And I am excited for these fan bases because I didn't think, at least coming into the season, that we were going to get this type of start out of the first month out of some of these teams. You know, BYU wasn't thought to be much. Indiana wasn't thought to be much in the Big Ten and the Big 12, respectively. But here we are. And more specifically on Indiana, because this is the one that is just so interesting to me. Indiana's offense, did you know, is 3rd in the country in scoring offense. Their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, has been excellent. I went and watched the Maryland film. And here's what I loved about what Indiana does offensively. By the way, they are technically the number 1 scoring offense in the Big Ten, even higher than Ohio State. What I love about watching their film is that they're, one, committed to the run game, and they've got diversity of run. So they'll use an H-back. They get a little bit of cross action. So they'll run zone. They'll run counter. They'll do a lot of different things that make it difficult on linebackers specifically, and they'll put those guys in conflict. Rourke is a guy that's very aggressive. I really like Curtis Rourke, and I've enjoyed watching him on film. 274 passing yards per game, 11 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Now, those 2 interceptions came against Maryland, and he was careless a couple times early with the football, which he had not shown previously. But again, when you combine his ability to be aggressive down the field with their ability to run the football and more so their commitment to running the football, you get something that's fairly good offensively. And then you get these wide receivers on the outside, and every single one of them, they'll target down the field, and they win down the field in 50-50 situations. Rourke does a good job of putting them in position to win down the field. So this Indiana team, like, they've got some staying power, and there's a chance that we're going to have an opportunity with Big Noon to go cover an Indiana game, and I'm pretty fired up for it. And I got to tell you, should maybe we have suspected something was going on when Curt Cignetti, their new head coach, was this confident all the way back before the season?
Hey, look, I'm super fired up about this opportunity.
I mean, stuff like that is so beautiful for college football. You'd never hear that in the NFL. You'd never, you know what, the Chiefs suck. And you know what, the Cowboys suck too. You know, like, you'd never hear that. And so just his ability to be raw, generate interest in his program. You know, the whole story is really good, and it's been fun watching them on film. Rutgers is 4-0 this year. They won at Virginia Tech, by the way. That's a Virginia Tech team that should have beat Miami last week. Then they beat Washington at home last Friday night. Big game at Nebraska this week. That's going to be a big test for Rutgers. Manny Diaz is 5-0 at Duke in his first year. He left Penn State as their defensive coordinator, and he's got Duke at 5-0. They just beat North Carolina in a rivalry game, 21-20. BYU beat K-State 2 weeks ago. They beat Baylor last week. So BYU and those guys, those undefeateds, are my number 5 surprise in college football so far. All right, let's go to the not so good surprises. Let's go to the bad surprises. Number 5 on the bad surprises so far in this season, it's got to be Oklahoma State's inability to run the football. Like, what happened here? This was not what we expected. Ollie Gordon is only averaging 67 rush yards per game a year after winning the Doak Walker. He was 124 yards per game last year when he won that award. There are 114th. They are 114th in the country in rushing this season, only averaging 3.5 yards per carry, which is 105th in the country. Like, guys, remember, they have all 5 starting linemen back. I don't understand. They had Bowman back. This should have been better. This was a giant surprise for me. I thought that Oklahoma State would not only compete for the Big 12 title, but that Gordon would have some Heisman run to this point in the season, and it just hasn't materialized. Now, Oklahoma State has started slow before, and then they finish a lot better. We've seen that in subsequent years, but boy, that is, to be honest, like, that is one of the more shocking things that we've seen so far in college football this year. I don't think any of us expected what we're seeing at Oklahoma State. Let's go back to the good side. Number 4, good surprise, and this pops up a little bit after their first game. But since their first game, a good surprise has been Clemson. How about Clemson's offense and what they've been able to do since basically being shut out? I know they didn't get technically shut out, but they didn't do anything against Georgia week 1. And maybe Georgia is that good. I'm not sure, although Bama seemed to move the ball on them just fine last week in the first half. But what Clemson has done since then, because let's be honest, after last season, they had high expectations, fell woefully short. Had high expectations again coming into this year, and then fell flat on their face in week 1. So since then, it has been a pleasant surprise to watch this offense get better and better and better. So you see more of a maturation and a combination of this Garrett Riley offense with Cade Klubnik at quarterback. And since that loss to Georgia, Clemson leads the country in scoring at 55 points per game. That's nothing to scoff at. Their schedule only has one ranked team on it, home against number 22 Louisville in November. Like, folks, Clemson is on their way. I touched on that on Monday, but Clemson and what they're doing, I would be very surprised if they don't wind up in the ACC championship game. And the way that they look and the way that they're trending versus the way that Miami looked specifically last week against Friday, if that game happened this week, I would probably pick Clemson straight up against Miami. Even though I love Cam Ward and I've been here for this Miami run and I've loved it, but at this point, the better team and the better trend in terms of direction has been Clemson. By the way, they face 1-4 Florida State in Tallahassee this week. Florida State is more on that in just a moment. Number 4, bad surprise. Okay, so we've got Oklahoma State as number 5. Now, number 4, bad surprise. Michigan looks lost right now. This is not anywhere close to the team that we have seen over the last 3 years. Now, they want it to be similar. And the difference is that I just don't sense that they have a real deep understanding of who they are now. This Michigan team in the first half against Minnesota looked very good. Against the entire game against Texas looked totally lost. We started with Davis Warren at quarterback. There were so many mistakes in the passing game, too many turnovers, and then they went to Alex Orji, and there's just no passing game to speak of. They get up big on both USC and then Minnesota in the first half, and then they totally fall apart with an inability to move the ball offensively in the second half and allow the opposition to get back in the game and candidly, really be in a position to win, in particular in that USC case. This is a team that previous seasons was so good in terms of field position, turnover margin, discipline, in terms of the lack of penalties. And this year, that hasn't been the case. They have lost some of that Michigan identity, which means that they don't have a blueprint to follow like they did in previous years. And there's no margin for error. If they're not perfect, then all of a sudden they can be beat, and they can be beat in a hurry. So the rest of the year now, what Michigan is going to have to deal with is the fact that if they're not perfect, they will be vulnerable to be beat. I think that they're going to be in a lot more one-possession games, which puts a lot of pressure on a quarterback and an offensive line, in particular when that quarterback and offensive line have shown an inability to throw the football. That has to develop. So this Michigan team, for me, that was a bit of a surprise that they look lost like this. Like the identity has been kind of stripped from them. Now, maybe they would argue with me and that they would say, no, we know what our identity is. It's just an identity that doesn't have a big margin of error. Okay, that's fair, and we'll see if that plays out. But the problem is that within the games, USC and Minnesota, they lose that identity. And so Michigan looking lost has been quite a surprise for me. That was number 4. Let's go to the good side. Number 3. Good surprise number 3 of the college football season, I think happened last week. And it was that all of a sudden, we got a version of this Colorado Buffaloes team that we have never seen before. So the complete Colorado showed up, and now all of a sudden that is an incredible surprise in college football, and it's changing the dynamic of the Big 12. The defense has been a lot better. I thought that the defense played their best and most complete game against UCF. Their front has been terrific. Livingston, their defensive coordinator, has been tremendous. Their edges play hard. And then you've got this offense. And we all knew that they were going to be able to play offense. But here's the difference. Early in the season, Colorado was using a lot of what's called 10 personnel, which means 4 wide receivers on the field and only 1 back. And when you have 10 personnel on the field, it is very difficult to control the defense. You can't put them in conflict. It's very difficult to get anything from a misdirection going on, in particular in the backfield. So it's hard to control linebackers. It's hard to do anything other than zone run game because you don't have an ability to control the edge of the defense. Okay. And so they're sitting in 10 personnel, and Nebraska just beats them up. I mean, beats them up. And candidly, some other teams did too, but they won the football game. With 10 personnel, you don't have a tight end, which means the edges of the offensive line are tighter to the quarterback. So Shedeur had no time whatsoever. Those tackles were on an island. They were getting beat quickly. Then you go to UCF film, and you're like, hold on, this looks markedly different. And let me tell you what they did. I turned on that film against UCF, and all of a sudden, they're in 11 personnel. And they were in 11 personnel a lot. They went from like 80% 10 personnel, 1 back, 4 wide receivers, no tight ends, to about 80% 11 personnel, 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. Now, you would say that the strength of their team is their wide receiver core, and I would agree with that. But just putting an H-back or a tight end on the field did wonders for the complexity and diversity of their offense. It did wonders. So you turn on the film against UCF, and now all of a sudden, the run game has some cross action. You can hold the edge by just spinning that H-back back, and he can just cut down the defensive end on one side, and you can run zone. You can also run counter and gap schemes because now you have a tight end to pull along with the guard. You're not trying to pull a guard and a tackle away from a side. You can't do that if you don't have width to the formation, width meaning at least a tight end, whether he's in line or just behind the tackle. A lot of technical talk to basically say like the diversity of run game and the ability to put the linebackers in conflict made Colorado's offense completely different and much more difficult to defend. We obviously saw what it did for the run game. And they were able to run some of those gap schemes and in particular get downhill, and they were able to run the ball as effectively as they have under Deion Sanders. So that was huge for them. That was huge. But it did something else as well. Because the tight end always was in a check protection mode, which means he's not just out on his route right away. They were still using a six-man protection, but rather than the back come up and check the linebackers or be a check protection player, now the tight end was a check protection player, which means at least on that side, you have width to the offensive line. And that quick edge in terms of pressure on Shedeur was not happening. So Shedeur was able to just float towards that H-back, even if it's just a half a step, and even if it's just a half a beat or a beat in the pocket that they were gaining in time for him to throw, that was monumental, throwing the football down the field. And now those skill position players on the outside, they were winning. So everything changed just with a personnel change with Colorado. I firmly believe that they're going to lean heavily into this because even during the game against UCF, I will tell you, when they got out of 11 and went back to 10, didn't look as good. It did not look as good because there's no conflict on those players. You can't hold edges. You can't create width in pass protection. You can't create conflict on linebackers, all these different things. You can't run diversity of run game. It's usually just zone out of 10. Out of 11, you can run gap schemes and zone, all these different things. And it made them such a complete team. If they stick to that, they will be very difficult to beat in the Big 12. So number 3, good surprise in college football, a complete Colorado, and a big adjustment on that offensive side that made them very difficult to stop. Number 3, bad surprise. What happened to Kansas? So before the year, I was very big on Kansas. I think Lance Leipold is an outstanding coach. I think Daniels, their quarterback, when he was healthy, has been as effective as anybody in the sport. They were building something really special, and you look up and they're 1-4. 1-4. They won 9 games last year. They were number 22 in this year's preseason poll. Jalen Daniels back. That hasn't worked out. They're 0-4 against FBS teams. Their losses are to Illinois, UNLV, West Virginia, and TCU. And what we talked about before the season in the Big 12 has kind of panned out in terms of these losses to West Virginia and TCU. It's like there's not a huge margin between these teams. So you get the wrong guy injured, you don't play your best, and you can be beat. I think the Colorado UCF example last week, I mean, Colorado was plus 42 from the Vegas spread. That's a staggering amount. So Illinois beating Kansas sent them on this little bit of a downward spiral. Then a good UNLV team beats them. Then West Virginia gets them. Then TCU gets them. And you look up and they're 1-4 and haven't beaten an FBS team. They blew a fourth quarter lead against Illinois. They had a lead with 2 minutes to go against UNLV. They blew an 11-point lead against West Virginia and had a 24-21 lead in the second half against TCU. That's the margin. That's the margin we were talking about in the Big 12, and it just hasn't paid off for Kansas. And you just wonder, like Andy Kotelnicki leaving Kansas as an offensive coordinator and going up to Penn State, maybe that was just a bigger factor. But number 3, bad surprise has been Kansas so far, being 1-4. Number 2, good surprise. How about Tennessee putting themselves in a position where they are a legitimate national title contender? That's a great surprise, I think, for everybody, not just Tennessee fans, okay? The more teams that we have on the top echelon or tier in college football, the better, I think. And Tennessee, I had them number 18 in my preseason poll. I'm pleasantly surprised by what's gone on with Tennessee. They have the number 1 scoring offense in the country. They've got the number 2 scoring defense in the country. So they're doing it on both sides of the ball. And candidly, I'm all in on Tennessee. And let me tell you why. Tennessee, to me, in their makeup, resembles last year's national champion. Now, not in every single area, but let me make a few of the tie-ins. Last year, Michigan was 14th in the team composite score. That means a measure of your talent across your entire roster. And last year's Michigan team was 14th in the country as far as most talented team in the country. And it just so happens that was one of the lowest composites that we've seen win a national title in a long time. we've seen these upper echelon teams, Georgia and Bama and these Clemson teams and LSU, their team composites were fairly high. And obviously so, because they recruited so well. So this Michigan team was a bit of an anomaly. But what did they have? They had a deep, great defense, number one, and the most talented player on their composite list was their quarterback. J.J. McCarthy was the highest rated player that Michigan had. So they had a quarterback that could elevate them over the X's and O's. And actually, J.J. did that. Nobody in college football converted more third and longs than J.J. McCarthy. So he was their best player. Their most talented player was their quarterback, and they had a deep, great defense. Okay. Well, what does Tennessee have? Well, number one, they're the 17th ranked team in this year's team composite. So you could make this case of like, no, they're not really a national title contender, but their defense is excellent. I already said they're the number 2 scoring defense in the country. Michigan last year was the number 1 scoring defense in the country. So when you've got a great defense, and more specifically a great defensive line, which Tennessee has, you can overcome some of those talent disparities that you might have from an holistic roster perspective as it relates to some of the other teams. And then what's Nico? Nico Iamaleava, guess what he is? He's exactly like J.J. McCarthy in that they are the 2 most talented players on those respective rosters. So you look at the composite and you're like, wait, can Tennessee really do this? And you're like, well, yeah. 1, they've got a great defense, just like Michigan had last year. And 2, their most talented player is at the most important position, which actually raises the level of all boats. So a great quarterback is like the tide. Here comes the tide. All the boats in the harbor end up raising. And that's why I think Tennessee is a bona fide national title contender. Both JJ and Nico, 5-star players. Let's go back to the bad side. Number 2, bad surprise. Oklahoma's struggles on offense. They have been really bad on the offensive side. I did a deep film review last week after that loss to Tennessee. Now, part of it was that Tennessee is really good. The other part of it is that Oklahoma schematically was just horrific in that game. There's no other way to put it, by the way. There's legitimately no other way to put it. Their protection plan was all over the map. Their run game plan was all over the map. They could not target defenders in the run front. Like it was bad. It was bad for OU. And now we're sitting here with like this quarterback dilemma. So Oklahoma is 121st in the country in total offense this year. They're averaging under 300 yards per game. This is an offense, by the way, that was supposed to take off with Jackson Arnold, five-star quarterback, a bunch of really talented wide receivers. Arnold's now been benched. Nick Anderson has barely played. Jaden Gibson was lost for the year in fall camp. The offense was a disaster against Tennessee in their opener in the SEC. That led to a quarterback change. Now you got Michael Hawkins in there, and guess what? They still, even though, like, guys, they should not have beaten Auburn. Like, Auburn gave them that game. And to me, like, the offense wasn't much better against Auburn. Under 300 yards again. They were fortunate they got that pick 6 late in the fourth quarter in order to win the game. Again, Auburn kind of handed them the game. So Oklahoma really should be sitting here with 2 losses, and their struggles on that side of the ball have, to me, just been a huge surprise. I thought Jackson Arnold was going to be a better fit schematically for the players that they had on the outside, and it just hasn't materialized. Just hasn't materialized at all. Number 1 good surprise in college football. Are you ready? Can we drum roll it? Joy to the world. Number 1 good surprise, true freshman overachieving. Can we just sit back and appreciate the fact that we have true freshmen all over the country that are legitimately some of the best players in college football? I have been absolutely loving watching these guys both live and on film. We've got Ryan Williams at Alabama. We've got Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. And we've got maybe the best of them all, Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State. They all came in with 5 stars, and yet somehow they're overachieving for fan bases that have huge expectations. These catches that you're watching on YouTube from Jeremiah Smith were ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. This guy could be the best Buckeye of all of them. And we've just seen 4 or 5 of some of the better college receivers in the sport all go to the NFL and have a ton of success as they've navigated their way to the National Football League. And to a man, they'll all sit there and they'll say like, hey, this guy might be even better than the rest. Ryan Williams, similarly, huge fan base, monstrous expectations in the state. The guy's been the Gatorade Player of the Year since he came out of the womb in high school in Alabama, and he's done nothing but impress, exceeding expectations. He just put on a show against Georgia. He is only 17, which I know everyone knows now, and they're going to start to roll their eyes, but he's not even close to 18 yet. He doesn't turn 18 until after the season is over in February. Like, what? Guy can't even vote. He's out there dominating college football. He's the highest rated wide receiver recruit that Bama has had since Julio Jones, and he's produced like Julio already. Again, massive expectations, and then he has exceeded those. That is so rare in this day and age where we're hyper involved and in tune with recruiting. Fan bases celebrate these commitments. You get out there, and Hayes Fawcett is throwing out his graphics, and man, like, everybody knows these guys, and these guys are meant to come in and be the greatest and all that. They've exceeded expectations. Dylan Raiola, same way. He's not only just meant to come in there and like, hey, you've got to start as a true freshman. He's supposed to be the program's savior at Nebraska. And I understand that they lost against Illinois, but he's the reason why they're in position to continue to compete in the Big Ten. He's the reason why this turnaround is happening at Nebraska. He's the best player on the field for Nebraska. Matt Rule will say that and has in a lot of interviews. Nebraska's 4-1. He's way ahead of schedule. Before the year, I said that he just needs to be a net positive, not a net negative. He's way more than that. He's the reason their offense is dangerous. And in a lot of ways, they need to catch up to Dylan Raiola. These three guys have been just a breath of fresh air. True freshmen that come in with massive expectations and exceed them. I mean, kudos. Number one surprise of the first month of the college football season, Ryan Williams, Jeremiah Smith, Dylan Raiola. Whew. I remember going into the spring game last year at Ohio State. So we were going in there to televise that game. And I had watched some of the practice film. And I thought, man, this guy is really good. And the coaches were like, yeah, he might be the best of all of them. And I was like, hold on a second. I just watched Marvin Harrison Jr. I just watched Jackson Smith and Jigba and Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Terry McLaurin. And like, come on, guys. Like, he can't be better than all of those guys. And he's probably better than all those guys. That's unreal. Jeremiah Smith is an absolute show, man. He's just an absolute show. Every time he plays, I want to watch. I'd buy a ticket to watch him play. That's the biggest compliment I can possibly pay a player. All right, we've got to end on the number one bad surprise. I know that, like, I would love to talk about those freshmen forever, but we do have to get to the number one bad surprise. And I think everyone knows where I'm headed with this, right? What's going on at Florida State? Hello? What are we doing? This was a top 10 team in the preseason, and they're nowhere to be found. I mean, like, nowhere to be found. They just got housed by SMU, the team that is not taking a dime to be in their conference. The team that's boosters are flipping the bill to pay for everything just so they can play in the ACC on the ACC network. And then they host the team that just won the conference, felt like they got snubbed from the college football playoff, and SMU houses them. What is happening at Florida State? All's gone wrong. Losses to Georgia Tech, Boston College, Memphis, and SMU. Like, what? Now they've got Clemson this week, and like, there's no chance. I mean, I'm telling you right now, like, if Florida State wins this week against Clemson, that will be the most shocking result in all of college football, because up to this point, it has not even been close. DJU is now going to be out with a broken finger. Brock Glenn is going to start against Clemson. Their next three is against Clemson, 5-0 Duke, at Miami. They could be starting 1-7. In fact, likely. Remember now, it's not just like, oh, yeah, those games. They've lost to Georgia Tech, Boston College, Memphis, and SMU. And you're expecting them to win any of the next three against Clemson, a 5-0 Duke team with Manny Diaz, and number 8 Miami on the road, by the way. 1-7 is like, bang, right here. We're staring down the barrel, Florida State, at 1-7. 1-7. By the way, Cal had the lead in the fourth quarter in the one game that they ended up winning. Cal very easily could have won that game. 8 losses is the most by a preseason top 10 team ever. They're going to give that a run. In fact, I kind of think that they're going to lose 9 games. They also have to have a road game against Notre Dame late in the year. Sorry. And when you lose to Boston College, Memphis, and SMU, like you can lose every game on your schedule. They've got North Carolina coming up. Like maybe they can beat North Carolina. I think that this is going to be probably a 3-9 team. I think 3-9 is where I'm landing. I think 3-9 Florida State, after being top 10, easily the number one bad surprise in all of college football. Nobody expected this, and it's wild. And Mike Norvell's buyout is like $65 million, by the way. Yikes. All right, let's get a little bit of a weekend check-in here. Weekend check-in is sponsored by Hampton by Hilton. When your team needs you at your best, it matters where you stay. Hilton for the stay. And my check-in is going to be in the group of 5. I have not talked a lot about the group of 5, but we need to because there's a couple of teams in the group of 5 and now a topic in the group of 5 that is fairly prevalent. Let's check in first on just the team that I like most in the group of 5 right now, and that is easily Boise State. Easily. Boise State keeps rolling. Impressive 45-24 win over Washington State last weekend. And the biggest deal is that Ashton Jeanty is just like a man-child. Ashton Jeanty should absolutely be in New York for the Heisman Trophy. If he was, well, let's just say if I had to vote today, he would be on my list of 3. There's no question. In a lot of ways, he's been the best. It's just hard from that level. Okay. Now, he was great against Oregon. This guy is going to get drafted. He is a true NFL running back. Talking with those Oregon coaches before and after the game where they played Ashton Jeanty, they said that this guy is just an absolute man-child. He's averaging 211 yards per game, and he's got 13 touchdowns in 4 games. Oh, by the way, he's averaging 10 yards per carry. You see some of these clips if you're watching on YouTube, which you should, and you should subscribe. He just runs people over. He's a bowling ball. Really, really impressive guy, which makes them my best team in the group of 5 right now, because trying to stop him for anybody is going to be difficult, really difficult. Another team that I've been impressed with, UNLV. In the midst of everything that was going on last week with Matthew Sluka and all the news about their quarterback leaving and wanting to redshirt and the NIL and everything, all they did is go out there and just absolutely pound Fresno State. And that's not a terrible Fresno State team. Fresno State got beat 59-14. Remember, Fresno was in a 1-score game with Michigan in the fourth quarter in the opening week. And UNLV just went out there and killed them. Haj Malik Williams comes in, and he started at quarterback. 3 passing touchdowns, also ran for 119 yards and another touchdown. He's a 6th-year guy, by the way. He transferred in from Campbell. Go Camels, by the way. Yes, the Campbell Camels. Gotta love college football. That's an FCS team. I think these 2 teams are the best teams in the group of 5. They do play, by the way, in the regular season. They're going to play in Vegas October 25th and then potentially again in the Mountain West Championship game. And here's all I'll say. Like, I've looked around at all the, JMU has played well, and there's been some other teams in the group of 5 that have played well. But these are the 2 best teams, and this is the best group of 5 league. I believe right here at the end of September that the best group of 5 league, the Mountain West, should have its champion as the representative in the playoff. So to me, these 2 teams are the best in this conference. Whoever wins the conference should go to the playoff. I think the playoff representative from the group of 5 is going to be either Boise State or UNLV. And we'll have to see who that is. I think it's going to be very tough to beat Boise. Very tough. This is a team that's used to winning, right? They've got some history on their side, even at that level. And dude, Ashton Jeanty, I'm telling you, go watch Ashton Jeanty. His ability to hit home runs and run powerfully is outstanding. He's right now the most productive back in the country. Now, as we kind of finish up, and in regards to bringing up UNLV, I thought like, hey, I haven't touched on this Matthew Sluka issue. There's been now some articles. Bruce Feldman and Stu Mandel wrote a good article kind of recapping everything that was going on with that NIL story from last week. And so I thought, you know what? I at least want to touch on it. It's touchy. So no one knows exactly what's true because all of it happened in the shadows. So this situation sucks for everybody. Okay. I think it sucks for UNLV. It sucks for all of those players. And if Matthew Sluka felt like he was promised something that didn't appear, it sucks for him too. I know that that's not popular, but as he decides to utilize his red shirt, that was the only recourse he had. If he was promised something and it didn't show up, then he's got to do that. Because if he just continues to play and say like, oh, it'll be resolved, then he's out. He's got no ability for recourse. Now, he could have played one more game for UNLV and still retained his red shirt, but it kind of came to a head last week. I read all the articles and listen, right now, it certainly seems like there was fault on a lot of different parties. Probably more on Sluka and his representation for not getting anything in writing, and maybe they're misrepresenting what was promised. I certainly believe that something was promised, or else I don't think he would have taken this drastic of a measure. Now, having said that, rather than just sit here and talk about a situation that we don't know really all the details, we don't have the concrete details, right? Let's just talk about the entirety of the situation from a global perspective for a moment. And when you're talking about NIL, I will just tell you that the dark areas, the shadow areas, this runs the world. It literally is the Wild West because of the vacuum that was created through all of these lawsuits and through NIL and through transfer portal. And now it is a giant mess. It is a giant mess. So what I wanted to do is just kind of lay out for you what maybe a typical or one of the typical ways like a team would enter into an NIL agreement with a player. So keep in mind that teams are not supposed to induce a player or his representatives with money in order to get him to commit. And yet that's all that happens. Okay, so we're already across the board. Everyone's breaking the rules. And you might be thinking, you're like, well, why don't they enforce the rules? They have been totally hamstrung in terms of enforcement by an ever litigious arena where everyone's going to sue them. And so all these verdicts have been handed down and it's just totally hamstrung the NCAA. They have no basis to go out there and enforce any of the rules that are on the books. So is it illegal to say to a player, hey, I'll give you $300,000 to come to our school and play here? Yes, that's illegal. Does it happen? Yes, every single day. Every single day. Now, let's talk about what that looks like, okay? Because this is where it gets really, I think, darker and eerier. These collectives are a bunch of boosters, and they're not technically affiliated with the school right now. So as the enforcement arm of the NCAA got weaker and weaker, the relationship between the collectives and the schools have gotten tighter and tighter. So now the coaches really are offering players an NIL package that then the collective has to go out and somehow raise, pay, all these things. So what does that look like? Well, here's what it looks like. Coaches will offer a player an NIL package. A lot of times these players and their representatives, because these representatives are not registered and a lot of them are not even like really true agents, they will think that all that means is cash. So let's just say for the sake of argument, let's just take $1.2 million, okay? For the sake of argument, clean numbers. And I know that's on the high end, but just clean numbers. Okay, so here's player, 5-star player, and this coach says, hey, you can come here and we'll give you $1.2 million annually. Okay, so a year. They're like, okay, well, that's great. Now, what the coach means and what the collective means is that they're going to give him a package worth $1.2 million. So that means that they can probably go out and find an apartment for him, get him a car lease, maybe get some jewelry and maybe some other in-kind things and take that off of that total number of $1.2 million. They're also going to say like, hey, listen, this is going to be paid out monthly. All right. So your stipend, your collective paycheck, the collective is going to payroll you every single month, $100,000. And then they're going to take away any of the money that is in kind. So take away the rent, take away the car, take away all these different things. So let's just say that's 40 grand. Who knows? All right. Who knows? So now that's $60,000 a month that the player is going to receive every single month. And the player's job is to do two things: stay on the team and stay eligible. If he does those two things, then the collective is going to pay him $60,000 a month, even though he thinks in his mind he's probably should be receiving $100,000 a month, because in his mind he's signed for $1.2 million. But really it's a package and not just cash. Now, in some cases it's cash, but it's not standardized. So you see where the gray area starts to come in. This is also what's interesting is that let's say that player decides, you know what, I'm going to go to the transfer portal. That collective cuts off payments right away. And then the player and their representation is like, hey, we didn't receive the $1.2 million. It's like, well, it wasn't $1.2 million. It was a package worth $1.2 million. And the fine print in this contract or agreement with the collective actually states that you've got to be a current student, you've got to be eligible, and you've got to be on the team. So now the payments stop and then they go off to some other place because some agent has gotten another offer from another team for an NIL package. So that's kind of how it can work. But here's the really dark side of this, is that a lot of times, and I think actually more frequently than not, coaches are offering or saying that they will pay a player a certain amount of money that the collective hasn't raised yet. So they will go out there and they will make commitments in some dollar amount. And then the collective is sitting there and they're like, dang, man, we've got to make payroll every single month. And I know there are more than one and plenty of others of collectives that have gotten down to like, hey, we've got 15 days worth of funds in our bank account, and then we're not going to be able to pay our payroll. And they say that. They talk about it as payroll. And they're thinking to themselves, like, we got to find another donation. We got to find another way. We've got to get some cash. We got to call some apartment complex. We got to do something. And they have committed dollars that they don't have. This happens all the time. And by the way, every single collective knows that that's suicide. That's suicide, because as soon as they can't make payroll, all of those players are going to the portal, and then they're going to tell everybody else in the college football community, like, hey, you can't go there. They don't fulfill their NIL commitments. That's one of the things that's going to be happening now to UNLV. That's partly what happened with that whole Jaden Rashada thing at Florida. It's a commitment without the funds already there. It's a mess, folks. It's an absolute mess. That's just kind of one example. And there's a million other things I could talk about and tell you about, but that's just one example of like how some of this actually works, how players are being paid, when they're paid, and what happens if they decide to transfer. That monthly thing is more prevalent now because teams and collectives at first were paying lump sums in the form of the amount that they promised, and then the player would transfer, and they were like, well, hold on, we have no recourse. And the player's like, what are you going to do? There's no enforcement. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell them that you paid me to be here, which is technically against the rules. So that's why collectives change the way that they operate, and now they start to pay out monthly. And as soon as the player is ineligible or not on the team or in the transfer portal, then they cut off those payments. It's wild. I'm telling you guys, it is absolutely wild. Hey, always thank you for listening. Remember to share the show with a friend. Share the show, subscribe on YouTube, all the things. We'll be back tomorrow with a preview episode, and you're going to definitely want to come back because I'm going to revisit after the first month of the season, revisit my playoff predictions, and we will revamp what the playoff could potentially look like. That's coming up tomorrow on Thursday on the Joel Klatt Show. See you then.